Perfect. Oh my goodness. All right. Emily, that just made my day. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for that. Perfectly timed. So here we go. Good morning, everybody. Happy Brain Dump Sunday. I am so excited to kind of dive into one of my very favorite practices. That it's funny because I think of it as magic, though it's not magic for the reasons you might think. So we're going to just create a little bit of context. Some of you are veteran brain dumpers. Some of you are new to brain dumping. And everywhere in between. And so we're going to explore just a little bit of context around why a brain dump, kind of what it is, what it's not, and why it's so useful. Then we're actually going to brain dump. Good morning. And spend 5 minutes giving yourself permission to play with this. And then we'll debrief a little bit, just kind of check in and see how you feel. So on that note, let me do this. Okay. So a brain dump. What I would love to know in the chat, I know a few of you are veteran brain dumpers, but in the chat, what I would love for you to share is when you think of this idea of a brain dump, why does that seem interesting? And for those of you that brain dump all the time, what do you love about it? What do you love about it? So just kind of like a brain dump about a brain dump. How's that? In the chat, go ahead and share what is it that sounds either intriguing if it's new to you or not a regular practice, or if it is a regular practice, why do you keep coming back to it? I'd love for you to put that in the chat. And as you do that, Maggie says, the time and space to write down what's on your mind and what you're thinking about. Yeah. Naming the things, good, happy, uncomfortable, it's all released. Yeah. Onto the paper and then letting it go. Fabulous. Thank you. Yeah. So these are, oh, you've never, Emily, I'm so excited. Yes. Okay. Quieting the unwanted noise. Perfect. So let's talk about why, right? And this is a good reminder, even for those of us that are veterans. So our brains are masters at storytelling, right? And we have something like 70,000 thoughts on a given day. We carry them around with us all day long. And because of that, we can feel overwhelmed. We can feel like our mind is racing with the zillion of things, right? Or the 70,000 things. There are judgments there. There are emotions. And a lot of the time, what happens with those thoughts is there's an initial thought, but then there's a series of thoughts as a response to the thought, right? And it takes us down this like spiral, this rabbit hole. So one of my teachers, Martha Beck, used to talk about clean and dirty pain. Clean pain, ouch, I stubbed my toe, right? Yeah, ouch, it hurts. Dirty pain, ouch, I stubbed my toe. Oh my goodness, tomorrow I'm not going to be able to go on that walk in the park with my friend, right? And then all these other thoughts start happening. And my invitation to you is to consider that none of these practices, brain dump or anything else, are about not having those thoughts. But to Karen's point, it's about giving them a place to go so that you perhaps don't have to carry them with you all the time, right? Now, the idea of this is that this isn't a flip of a switch. You don't just brain dump and those thoughts magically disappear. That is not the magic of the brain dump. You may not feel any different. You may not fix anything, right? But a brain dump creates a safe and soft place to land for yourself. It is a place where you belong as your entire self, all of the thoughts. Right? Has anybody ever had a thought or had a judgment or had an emotion, and then you have a series of, I shouldn't feel that way. I shouldn't have that thought, right? I should be over it by now. I should know better. Any of those things? And so when we do that, it keeps that hamster wheel going, which keeps us fully in survival mode and not in this place of aliveness. And friends, aliveness is the full experience. It's the full range, right? Yes, it's the delight and the exuberance and the rainbows and the unicorns and the wildflowers and the parks, but it's also the frustration and the sad and the roar and the wanting to have a temper tantrum. It's all of those things, right? And so we give ourselves permission. This is when we think about moving from survival mode into thriving. This is one of the first steps. And this kind of bridges both this, to me, this practice in particular, a brain dump, is kind of a precursor to getting rooted. Because in a way, a brain dump helps us locate ourselves. It's like when you turn on your GPS on your phone, right? And the signals have to get acquired. It gives you a place to say, here I am, right here. This is how I'm feeling. This is where I am at this moment in time. Because, oh, by the way, 5 minutes from now, an hour from now, whatever, you're going to feel different, right? And that's the way it goes. Karen says you call it spaghetti brain. One thought runs into another thought and you go down that path. Yes, right? And so you locate yourself. And the more you do this, and I'm not talking your brain dump all day long, but when you give yourself as a regular practice, and you get to define regular. For me, it's daily. For my clients, nudge, nudge. I encourage it to be daily or at least once a week when we gather. But that idea of giving yourself this place where all of you belongs, where you're not censoring yourself, you're not judging yourself, you're not saying you should be over it, you're giving yourself permission to be there. So I'm going to pause and ask, are there questions or thoughts so far? So let's talk about why a brain dump, right? We've already talked about why, but specifically a brain dump. So I first came to the idea of a brain. I've always been a journaler, but I would offer you that brain dumping is a little different than perhaps what we're used to with journaling. In fact, I love to say when people say to me, Ellen, I'm not a journaler. There's no way you're going to make me do this. And I'm like, okay, give me 4 or 5 sentences, write them. It can even be, Ellen is making me do this. By the 4th or 5th time, you're going to have another thought. And if you come back to this practice enough, it starts to take on its own meaning for you. Emily says sometimes there's a need to get out of your own way, 100%. Right? So a brain dump found me years ago when I was reading the book, The Artist Way by Julia Cameron. And in it, she invites her readers to practice something called the morning pages. And the morning pages are 3 pages of stream of consciousness writing. And it's intended to cultivate creativity. But as I did that all those years ago, what I realized was that in that process, I was creating a place for just all of me to show up. And so perhaps, yes, it was cultivating creativity by just showing up for the page, but there was this energetic release that was happening. I wasn't necessarily having ahas. I wasn't necessarily solving all of the things, but it was giving wherever I was a place to exist. And I started to see this as a mental decluttering, brain decluttering. something that if I showed up for on a regular basis, I was getting much more fluent with taking my thoughts, noticing that, and not judging that. And that is what a brain dump is. There are very few rules to a brain dump. In fact, there are only two. One is it has to be written, because if it stays in your brain, if you try brain dumping in your brain, and I have on a very rare occasion had a conversation with somebody and said, okay, let's do a verbal brain dump. And the minute I say it, I'm like, this goes against everything I believe in. We sometimes need that verbal, right? Yes. But I would offer that it's the transference from our brain through our hands onto the paper that is where the magic happens, because that's where we start to detach, right? Because in that verbal brain dump with your best friend or family member or dog, if anybody ever talks to their dog or cat, I'm a dog person, but right, there's not a release. When it's written, you start to see it more as an observer rather than being in it. So brain dump has to be written. And second, and the other rule is there's no censoring of yourself. There's no, oh, I shouldn't write that. And if you're worried of, oh my gosh, you want me to put all of my thoughts in a, like, what if somebody finds them? Well, the good news is if you're like me and your handwriting is messy, nobody will ever be able to decode them. Or I am the keeper of notes of where journals are. I have friends, clients who have told me, if anything were to ever happen to me, this is where my brain dump journal is, please destroy. So I'm happy to be that person for you if you need it. But right, that's not the point. It's giving yourself permission. The quantity of time doesn't matter. It could be 5 minutes, it could be 30 minutes. I like 5 minutes, especially as a starting point. For a regular practice, it's a really nice place to begin, right? Can you go longer? Absolutely. But it's that idea of just showing up. You can write it on the back of a Post-it note, on the back of an envelope. In fact, my brain dump journal, full disclosure, is upstairs. And I was like, where am I going to brain dump? I have a little other journal. I can just brain dump there, right? It doesn't matter where you brain dump. The other important thing is that I will offer is that brain dumps are not necessarily meant to be reread. You can, but you don't have to. You're giving something a place to exist. If it's that important, it'll come back to you when it needs to, right? Any questions about that before we brain dump? Okay. So we're going to just quickly kind of locate ourselves before we begin writing. And this is something that I've added in, I guess in the last year or so, 6 months maybe, because sometimes we rush. We rush into all the things, including our brain dumps. And there can be that welcoming, right? If this practice is about welcoming ourselves, there is this invitation in. So piece of paper handy, pen, and then just take a moment and glance around your room, your physical space. Just notice what's here for you. Look around, or just let your gaze fall in one place. And then begin to bring your awareness towards yourself and just lightly notice the body. Maybe you notice your breath. And notice if there's one word, an emotion or a feeling or word that describes your existence in this moment. It could be curious, it could be tired, it could be impatient, it could be anything. Jot that down. And then find a breath in. Exhale it out. And we'll brain dump for 5 minutes. Here we go. Allow your pen to move on the page. if at any point you're not sure what to write, just write. I don't know what to write. I'm just going to keep showing up and see what emerges. Begin to allow your thoughts to wrap themselves up. As you do, notice what word, feeling, or thought might encapsulate how you feel in this moment. 5 minutes later, and just jot that down. It could be the same. It might be different. Welcome, thank you. So, there's noticing. Does anyone want to share where they started and where they ended? Either in the chat or you can take yourself off of mute.
I can share.
Yeah, thanks, Karen.
I woke up great. Tommy was a complete, I won't even say the word this morning. It was very, very stressful because I have a spouse who tends to cater, and there are battles he's going to have to go through to not give Tommy so much power. And I was able to write that down. And what I'm feeling coming up is that I told him in a very calm, centered way, this is what I see happening. This is how it makes me feel. This is how being ignored and you doing what you want dismisses me in a way. And damn, proud of myself that I actually did it. I've looked at myself in the mirror and said, you're showing up for yourself. So that's what I wrote about, showing up for me and just.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. Yes. So it's this interesting thing, right? The brain dump, because it not only locates yourself, but it's like looking sometimes in the mirror. And I'll have thoughts as I'm journaling, as something will come out in a brain dump. And literally as I write it, I'm like, really? I know that that's not true, right? It's a judgment. It's a story I've told myself, but writing it down helps me see kind of the stuff that's happening in here, the echo chamber, the chorus that my brain is going on and on, the questions, and it creates space to, yes, get rooted. Because one of the things to get rooted, and it's the conversation we're going to go into this week in Tuesday's masterclass, but to be anchored, right, in the present, in your body, without giving everything away for Tuesday, all of the things, we have to create space for where we are. That starting place. And it also invites us to get curious, to notice that sometimes it's not about fixing, but about noticing, right? So one of the questions that came up in the masterclass on Thursday was, well, when you get triggered, right? Part of it is this noticing how you're feeling, allowing it, and then starting to get curious. What am I making this mean, right? What do I need to know right now? And just starting to ask questions. But until we know where we are, we can't do that. I heard at some point last year I was taking a class on breath practices on pranayama. And there in yoga, we often hear this, we get to release, all the things, release what it is you're holding on to. It's hard to know what to release if you're not sure what it is you're holding on to. So the brain dump helps us access that in a safe and nurturing place for ourselves. Right? So thank you, everybody, for being here, for sharing this. I would love to answer any questions, to think about what takeaways do you have from either this practice in general, from today's session, from just your noticings, any takeaways or questions.
I have a takeaway from this practice. Through doing it, I've noticed that I am definitely extremely judgmental of myself. And when I put down those judgments on paper, I start to see that I'm creating that, and I've started to let those judgments go. Those are somebody else's thoughts, feelings, not mine.
Yeah.
And it's been really powerful to write it down instead of living in those judgments.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing that. Yeah. All right. Right? Oh my goodness. Absolutely. Look, we're excellent judges of ourselves. And we're not always kind. Right? And so beginning to create this place where you notice, what are those thoughts you're telling yourself? That's the first step to then beginning to transform those, right? So the brain dump isn't the magic piece, it's the awareness that comes. I love it when, clients talk about kind of the changes, and a lot of the changes that you experience through this type of work are about your awareness. And those can seem intangible, and yet they are so powerful, because the more we can become aware, and I'm not talking like hyper aware, right? Hyper vigilant, because we can get into trouble even with that. But just this giving ourselves permission to befriend ourselves, to become our own best friend, to not speak to ourselves in the way that we so often do. That all starts with noticing and getting aware, and then getting curious. All right, my friends. If there are there any other questions or thoughts? On Tuesday, we are gathering at 12:30 p.m. Eastern for a getting rooted session. So 3 ways to get rooted. Because there's this mantra that I read recently that I've come to love, that flying begins on the ground. And the more rooted you are, the higher you can fly. So we're really going to talk about what does it mean to get rooted? Why is it important? And how can it help you feel more peace, more purpose, and more joy? So join us on Tuesday at 12:30 for that. If you have questions, if you have thoughts, please reach out. I'm going to put on the resource page where all the replays are, some resources for brain dumps, a podcast episode about brain dumps, and I feel like there was something else I was going to put. I don't remember what it was, but it will be there a little bit later today. So check that out if you are interested. And otherwise, I wish you a fabulous rest of your day and look forward to seeing you very, very soon. Thanks, everybody.